Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be going through the user management with Security Director Learning Byte. All right, so let's jump right to our example. In this example, we have VSRX1. Now, VSRX1 has a few connections. It's connected to the internet, it's connected to some users, FXP0 interface, and that has a radius server on that network. Okay, so what do we want to do here? The criteria on the slide is listed. We want to manage users on VSRX1 using Security Director with the following criteria. First, we want to set some general password requirements. We want to have a minimum reuse set to 5, and that means that users can't reuse the past 5 passwords. Then a maximum length of 50, a minimum length of 10, and then we need to create 2 local users. That's Ops Level 2, which has operator permissions, and Ops Level 3, which has super user permissions. And then we need to configure a radius server connection on VSRX1. And with this, it's going to be using that 172.25.11.65 address you see on the slide. And we want to prefer the radius server, but if for some reason the radius server isn't reachable, we don't want to be locked out of VSRX1. And so what we want to do there is, if the radius server isn't reachable, we want to fail back to that local database on VSRX1. So in that regards, if the radius server isn't reachable, then we can log in with Ops Level 2 or Ops Level 3 with a local account on VSRX1. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to Security Director and get this started. All right, here is Security Director, and we are in the configure mode. And you might think that we need to configure the stuff for this learning byte in configure mode. And I wouldn't fault you for thinking that, because this is configuration that we're doing. However, configure mode in Security Director is strictly reserved for security-related features. And configuring access to the box, like what we're doing as far as user accounts, isn't considered a security feature. So what we need to do is we need to go to Devices, and then we select our device, which is VSRX1 in this case, select Configuration, and select Modify Configuration. And then here in Modify Configuration, you'll see some boxes on the left. And we want to go to the user management section. And here we see all the details about user management. And first we'll start off by configuring the actual user, since that's the first option we see here. So we need to click the Create button for the user details. And this will allow us to create a new user. And we can select the user type of root or LSYS. In this regards, we just want to specify it for the root logical system and not a user logical system. And so we'll leave that at root. And so we want to first configure the Ops Level 2 user. We'll configure a password. Remember, this user needs to be set to have the operator permission. So that's the login type. Select OK. And then we need to create another user. This is going to be the Ops Level 3 user. Specify the password. And he's going to be a super user. So we're okay leaving it at the default of super user. Then let's open the authentication methods section. And let's click Create. And this allows us to specify the authentication order. Remember that we want to check with the radius server first and then fall back to any local accounts on VSRX1 if the radius server is not reachable. So we need to select radius, click OK, then we need to select create again, and then we need to select the password option. Now this password option references using the local database. And so what this configuration does here is we'll check the radius server first. If the radius server is not reachable, then we'll fall back to the local database. And then we have to enable a radius server, obviously. Doesn't make much sense to set the authentication order to check with the radius server first if we don't enable a radius server. So let's click the Create button here. And then we need to enter the IP address. That's the IP address of the radius server. And then the password to reach the radius server. We'll specify the default port of 1812. And the source IP address, that's going to be the FXP0 address that is for VSRX1. And retry attempts, we'll put that at 5. Click OK. And then we scroll down, we see password settings. Now this is where we're going to set our maximum, minimum, and reuse parameters. And so with this, we want to set the minimum reuse to 5. So that means every 5 passwords needs to be different for a user. We'll set the maximum length to 50, the minimum length to 10. And then let's click Save and Deploy to push this configuration to VSRX1. And we Can schedule for a later time or run right now. We'll just run that right now. No need to wait. And it deployed successfully. Perfect. That's what we want to see. So to verify this, let's go ahead and attempt to log in to VSRX1 with the Ops Level 2 or Ops Level 3 accounts. And notice how it hangs here for a minute. And this is going to take about 15 seconds because what happens here is the VSRX1 device is prompted or is prompting the user here for their password. And then it's reaching out to the Radius server. Well, that Radius server seat just went through. The Radius server happens to not be available right now. So it times out and it waits and it waits and it waits. Okay, I'll check the local database. And then it checks the local database. So we can do show chassis hardware, but we can't get into configuration mode because remember, this is operational permissions only. So let's log in with Ops Level 3. And again, this is going to take about 15 seconds because remember, it's reaching out to the Radius server. That is, VSRX1 is reaching out to the Radius server and it's waiting for a response. So it has to wait and wait and wait. And with no response, then it checks the local database. And so just check the local database there. We do the show chassis hardware command. You can see, yeah, it works good. And we can also jump into configuration mode. So for one last test, let's just log in just with some other user that is not in either database. And see, it's checking, it's reaching out and trying to check the Radius server. And so again, it's going to time out because that Radius server is not there or it's unreachable for some reason. And you'll see when it does time out, it checks the local database and comes back with a password prompt, wrong again. So I'm just going to cancel that because that user is actually not on the device. All right, so that does bring us to the end of this Learning Byte. In this Learning Byte, we demonstrated how to manage users with Security Director. So as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.